Good evening. It's very good to be with you this evening as we continue our preparations for the election of the Mayor and members of the Assembly for London in the coming week. And it's great to be with Amir Eden, who looks after Living Bankside, which is the residents' forum for this part of London, by which I mean the Bankside fun area of Southwark, around Southwark Cathedral, and a place where life has always been lived to the full and out there on the streets in many ways. So it's good to have with us representatives of 4 of the parties who have candidates in the elections. And Amir, you're going to introduce them to us, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. So today we have with us, we have Gareth Bacon MP, who is a former GLA Assembly member from the Conservatives, representing Sean Bailey. We have Zach Polanski from the Green Party, who is also a candidate for the GLA Assembly and is representing Sean Berry from the Green Party. We also have with us James Murray MP, who was also former Deputy Mayor of London for Housing and is representing Sadiq Khan from the Labour Party. And we have Florence Sirot, who is also a candidate for Southwark and Lambeth for the Assembly and is representing Louisa Porritt, who is for the Liberal Democrats. So what we'd like to start off with is opening statements, and I'll take them alphabetically. So we'll start off with Gareth Bacon MP, please.
Well, thank you very much, Emir, and I'd like to thank the Living Bankside for inviting me to be here this evening. There are a record number of 20 candidates standing in this year's mayoral election. And I think it's fair to say that they bring a variety of interesting ideas and approaches, but in reality, the outcome is a 2-horse race. Either Sadiq Khan will remain in City Hall for another 3 years, or he will be replaced by Sean Bailey. Now, over the last 5 years, the current mayor's record is one of consistent failure. He's completed only 17,000 affordable homes. He's failed to control violent crime, with knife crime up by 39% since he took office, and murder reaching an 11-year high. TfL is in a mess, with more than 20 essential upgrades or improvements delayed or cancelled, and Crossrail is years late and billions of pounds over budget. Londoners deserve better than this, and Sean Bailey is offering a fresh start. He will make our streets safer. He will help young people get out of crime. He will help young Londoners get onto the housing ladder, and he will fix TfL's finances. Ultimately, the choice is therefore more excuses from Sadiq Khan or a fresh start with Sean Bailey. Londoners have a great opportunity before them on May the 6th. I hope they choose wisely.
Thank you very much. And now to Florence Sirot, please.
Thank you so much, Amir, for inviting me to this debate. Thank you, Living Bankside. I'm really pleased to be here. And it's good to see that you are so dynamic, that you organize hustings, and there are many participants asking questions. I really look forward to this debate. My name is Florence Sirot. You may gather that I'm French. I also have a British passport. I've been living in London for 20 years. So I'm settled here in Brixton with my family. I have 3 daughters. And I work in higher education. I had the chance to live and work in other capital cities, and I can tell you that London is the best city in the world. I love it. It's a fabulous city. It offers so many opportunities. It has history, it has culture, entertainment, everything you may wish for. And it deserves better. It's great, but it could be even better. And I want to make sure that Londoners have the quality of life that they deserve. So we've had 2 mayors, the last 2 mayors, Sadiq Khan and Boris Johnson. I think they've failed London. We've had a lot of service reductions in the police, in the fire stations. The housing crisis, when I moved in 20 years ago, was dominating the political debate. And 20 years on, the housing crisis is still there. So I think Londoners have been failed by both mayors. We need a new approach. We need people with new skills. We need a new vision. And we need people who can represent London at the international scale because we need to attract the best people in the world. London has always been doing this, but we need to continue to do this, and we really need a new energy. So we need to attract the best artists, the best architects, the best businesses, of course. And to do this, we need a team like Louisa Porritt's team and myself in the London Assembly to give Londoners the leadership and the voice that they deserve.
Thank you very much. And now can we go to James Murray, please?
Well, thanks very much, Amir, and thank you to Living Bankside for organising these hustings this evening. It's a pleasure to be here to represent my good friend, Sadiq Khan. And now, as some of you may have picked up over the last few years, Sadiq grew up on a council estate. And one of the reasons he makes sure people know that is so people know where he's coming from and why it was so important to him in his first term and why he'll continue to do in his second term to build a new generation of council homes for Londoners. He's put that at the heart of what he's been doing in terms of housing, alongside giving tenants the right to vote in estate regeneration. And in the second term, you know, Sadiq can build on those foundations, if you'll excuse the pun, and go further to make sure that that target of 10,000 council homes that we started building in the first term are completed in the second term, to go further by having City Hall directly building on City Hall owned land, to make sure that he fights and pushes for a solution for leaseholders who have been impacted so badly in recent years, and to make sure that he continues to fight for the powers he needs as the Mayor of London to deliver rent controls for Londoners. Now, I do actually agree with what the Conservative representative said, that at the end of the day, this is a two-horse race. We have on the one hand, Sadiq, who, as I said, grew up on a council estate, has put council housing at the heart of what he's doing and has the values London needs, and the Conservative candidate, whose solution for homeless families was to tell them to go and save up a deposit to buy a home. So I look forward to the rest of the discussion this evening when I can set out why I believe Sadiq Khan is the candidate with the vision, with the record and the values that London needs.
Thank you very much. And now to Zach Lansky, please.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us. Not too many thank yous because I've only got 1 minute to, first of all, dispel some nonsense and then get on to the really good stuff. Let's start with the nonsense that we just heard from Gareth and James. Labour and Conservatives are so determined in this election to insult my intelligence and everyone watching this too, because we all know this election is different. There are 3 ballot papers and 4 different votes. Only one of those ballot papers is first past the post. That's the usual system we use in our general election. And that's what creates two-horse races. This election was designed specifically to not have a two-horse race. And it's a little bit insulting that they're excluding the women from this race, which are Sian Berry, the Green Party candidate for mayor, and Louisa Porritt, who Florence is here representing this evening. But on to the good stuff. I am so excited to be here this evening because polls are showing that the Greens are on for a record result that should show in 9 days' time I'll be joining the London Assembly. And that's why I'm so happy to be asking for your vote tonight on the orange ballot paper. But as AOC says in America, we don't watch the polls, we move them. So I'm not complacent about anything. London right now is crying out for a new start. We have a climate and ecological emergency, and London could be the greenest city in the world. And what better way to start that new movement than with a green mayor? I'm very excited to talk about specific issues in Bankside, because I think it is a really fun place. I agree with Andrew's comments at the beginning. And it also has some of the problems that we see right across London. So I'm really hoping for an engaging discussion where we can really get down to the detail and look forward to it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we've had quite a few questions on Transport for London and TfL, as you can imagine. So I'm going to try and go through a few of these questions. If we can keep the answers short. I think some of them don't require long answers. So one of the questions that has been asked is around your party's position, but also your candidate's position around the continuing provision of the Freedom Pass and concessions to older residents, as well as those for children and young people. Bankside is a place full of people of different ages, but particularly we do have an older population, and so those will be affected perhaps by the changes that are proposed. And what is the position, and what are your views on that? If we can take that alphabetically as well. So Gareth Bacon.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Very briefly, I mean, Sean is looking to retain all of those concessionary travel benefits. He's looking at new ways to fund them. The key thing that we've seen during the pandemic, it would be wholly wrong for anybody to say that the reason why TfL's finances are in a mess is nothing to do with the pandemic. Clearly, the pandemic has had a major impact. Transport for London has had to be bailed out using government money twice so far. There will be a third bailout coming up after the election. But the key point about this is that it's the UK taxpayers who are putting that money in, not just London taxpayers. And London enjoys benefits in terms of concessionary travel that other parts of the country don't have. So the government's position is that London must need to raise the money to enjoy those benefits. And what Sean is proposing for this is some very innovative thinking around things like setting up sponsorship deals on the tube, and he's using the Dubai Metro as a good example of this. 1/5 the size of London, and it raises over £400 million in sponsorship per year. Sean wants to bring that to London, a much bigger metro, much more opportunity, and all of the money will then be channeled into protecting concessionary travel.
Thank you. And can we go to Florence, please?
Yes, so transport is a key issue in London. Public transport is really important because also we have air pollution at very high level in London, and the only way out is to boost public transports. So TfL is key to this. TfL is key to clean air in London. So at the moment, we have a business model for TfL, which for me doesn't work and is unfair. Why? In other capital cities in the world, public transports have a government grant. Why? Because capital cities contribute to the GDP of nations. And for example, London contributes to about 30% of the GDP of the UK. So the importance of London, the wealth of London, obviously has repercussions everywhere else in the UK. This is why we need to invest in London, and it's central government that needs to invest in London more, not companies. It's central government. It's a public service. It belongs to the public. It needs to be financed with public money. So we need a grant for TfL. We need, of course, to safeguard the Freedom Pass and the 16 Pass as well. We need to boost public service. We need to develop the Bakerloo line. At the moment, we still live on an infrastructure that was built in the 1860s. Of course, in the 1860s, people were very much forward thinking, but in 2021, we cannot go on living on an infrastructure of public railways and stations that were built in the 19th century. So we need to invest in TfL, and also the current business model, which makes tube users pay more because they need to subsidize the bus network, which is losing money. This also is unfair. Why would Oyster cards in the tube subsidize the bus network? This is completely unfair. And if you look at what Londoners pay in public transport, I think it's about 5 times what citizens pay in other capital cities. So Londoners pay a very high price to have a public transport network which dates from the 19th century, and this needs to change.
Thank you very much. Can we go to James Murray now, please?
Thanks, Amir. You know, there's a really important point that was just mentioned there, which is that London is very unusual, if not unique, in having no day-to-day grant from national or central government for its operations, which means that the burden for revenue falls on Londoners to pay through their fares. And, you know, despite that very difficult funding environment before the coronavirus outbreak hit, Sadiq had reduced the operating deficit by 71% and increased the cash balance by 16%. But then, as we all know, COVID hit and had a devastating impact for very obvious reasons on the amount of fare revenue that was going into Transport for London. Fare income fell by around 90% as a result of lockdown. And that's because Londoners were doing the right thing. Londoners were staying at home, working from home, minimising their travel. Londoners were doing the right thing. And that meant that the fare revenue coming into TfL fell. Now, as we know, that meant that TfL has had to then go to government to try and get some extra money to keep it going. But the government has been playing politics with it. And they were trying to put some conditions on the bailout, which Sadiq just felt were unacceptable, and he fought against, and he won some of the battles. He managed to fend off the attempts to scrap free travel for under 18s and for over 60s, and to protect them. And for Sadiq, that's crucially important, that the Mayor of London needs to interact with the government, but would absolutely fight London's corner when working with government to get the resources we need. So, I don't think it's going to be an easy time for TfL ahead, given what's happened throughout the COVID outbreak. But what's absolutely vital is that when it comes to things like free travel for under 18s, free travel for over 60s, we've got a mayor who will stand up for us and fight for us with a Conservative government.
Thank you very much. And now can we go to Zach, please?
Thank you very much, Amir. So you asked for a short answer. I can give you a short answer. Yes, with the Green Party, of course, we'll protect and retain these things. But I just want to elaborate on that, because I don't think that's enough. And I think the answers we're hearing from Sadiq Khan are certainly a lot stronger, in my opinion, than Sean Bailey on transport. But they're just keeping us treading water. And actually, we need to look at transformation. And one of the things I'm most excited about, this is Sean Berry's manifesto that I'm going to wave here. This is a 138-page document, which is a genuine working plan for London. And this manifesto didn't come from me. It didn't come from Sean. It came from experts. We went out and we met transport campaigners, faith leaders, teachers, nurses, doctors, whatever the field was. And we asked them for their ideas and their best ideas. And this is what transport campaigners gave us. And by the way, Sean, before she was an assembly member, was a very well-known transport campaigner. So we're really dealing with the best here. We need to protect these things, but we also need to look at a flatter fare. Now, we've got that with the bus zones in London. It doesn't change whether you're in zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And it doesn't make sense for it to do that on the tube either. So we'd make sure that following the leads of Paris and New York, it was possible to travel anywhere in London and pay the same amount. It's not fair, for instance, that a key worker who has to travel to hospital or to wherever they're working every day has to pay more to get to work than someone else, especially if they live in outer London, where it's going to cost them more to come into central. We'd also invest in bus stops. We want to have some of the best bus stops in the world. They can be comfortable bus stops that have real-time information on them. And by the way, on the green point, we can also make sure that they're friendly for bees, so we can be doing a good thing for ecology and environment at the same time. Now, the question you probably have is, how are we going to pay for this? Because that's been a lot of this discussion. And this is really simple. We want to bring in a smart, privacy-friendly road pricing scheme. This is essentially the principle that the polluter pays. So we'd be looking at making sure every car pays a different amount depending on its emissions, where it's driving, when it's driving, and we'd make sure that the people who are driving, because sometimes it is necessary to drive, are actually paying to subsidize all the green sustainable transport we can have. I'm so excited about our transport policy, and at the core of this, we absolutely need to protect for under 16s and over 60s.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to the next question, but whilst you're answering this question, you can also come back on what others have said, just for the initial question. So the next question is about which is actually crucial for Southwark residents, which is part that we represent. It's to do with the river crossing east of Tower Bridge, between Rotherhithe and Canary Wharf. If you can, in short, tell me what your short-term solution is and what your longer-term solution is. And the questioner has asked, in the short term, is it a ferry with an integrated Oyster card? And in the long term, will it be a pedestrian bridge? What are your parties and your candidates' stances on both of those? If I can start with James Murray, please.
Sure. Well, I think the one thing we know as a result of the COVID outbreak is that TfL's plans are going to have to be looked at carefully to see what's possible. And so, we need to be careful about what promises we make now, given how uncertain it is in terms of the funding that TfL will be getting from government and what they can do in the months and years ahead. But what's really important is that we make sure that transport is accessible to everyone. And one of the big things that Sadiq has put at the heart of his transport strategy, and this was when I was at City Hall a few years ago. It's not something new, it's something which has been in there throughout, is to try and encourage more people to healthy means of getting around, whether that's cycling, walking, and making sure that we reduce the dependency and the need for cars and reduce thereby pollution. Now, all of this is about making the city, particularly places in inner London, like in Southwark, more friendly for people to walk about in, to make sure people can cycle with confidence, and to make sure that the air is cleaner as well, which is why the ultra low emission zone, the ULEZ, has been so important in terms of reducing pollution in the air. And we've seen, sometimes I think people question how much impact can you have in a few years. If you look at the impact the ultra low emission zone has had on our air quality, it's been fantastic. It's been transformational. It's made a really big difference to the quality of the air. And I think particularly for places like Southwark, places in inner London, in central London, the quality of the air, the ability to get around by walking and cycling, and to make London a better quality of life city for all of us to live in, is at the heart of what City wants to do.
Thank you very much. Can we go to Florence, please?
Yes, so about the Rotherhithe crossing. Okay, in the last 30 years, London has developed a lot on the east. And of course, we need more crossing. We need to cross the river because there is now population there and they need to move, they need to go to work. So the tube network is operating at overcapacity. The Jubilee line is overstretched. And we all know at Canada Water in the morning, it's impossible to get on the tube because of the congestion. So we need to help people to move around. A big piece of infrastructure, like a bridge, is extremely expensive because of the technological challenges east of the river, because of water and all sorts of geological considerations. So what the Lib Dems suggest is to boost ferry crossings. We need to have more and organized ferry crossings and very regular ferry crossings so that residents from Rotherhithe can go to Canary Wharf. And I think it's the most green solution that we have. It's the easiest and it will be the most efficient. So this is what the Lib Dems are putting forward.
Thank you very much. And now to Zach Blansky, please.
Thanks, Amir. I love this question, but actually you answered your own question when you asked me. Yes, it would be a ferry crossing in the short term and a walking and cycling bridge in the long term. I want to pick up on James's answer because just like Sadiq, I agreed with part of it and I'm really disappointed with part of it. So let's start with the non-partisan bit. The bit I agree with is active travel is absolutely essential in our capital. We need to be doing lots to invest in walking and cycling. And Sadiq has made some improvements on that, but there's lots of places where we don't have a joined up network and the infrastructure has just not been put in place as quickly as it should. And he's been far too cautious with councils. So for instance, if we look at Kensington and Chelsea Council, there's Kensington High Street where they put in cycle lanes because that was a bit of the London cycle route that's really missing. It's clear the mayor should take those streets off Kensington and Chelsea Council when they can't be trusted with them. And he has that in his power to ask the Secretary of State to do it. And he's just been far too cautious about it. So we need him to step up. And then I think, James said that we need to be careful about what we promise. And that's true. We can't just go around promising things. But we also need to be cautious about saying things are too expensive because right now we are in a pandemic. And if ever we're going to promise more walking and cycling, it needs to be in a pandemic because right now we are at a crossroads. We are going to either recover from this pandemic with a car-led recovery, which means more pollution. It means more dangers for the climate emergency. It means more congestion. It means more people not being able to get to work. It means more dangerous streets. Or we say, now is the moment to seize this. And what is Sadiq doing? He's spending £2.1 billion. That's £2.1 billion on Silvertown Tunnel. Now, I know that's in a different part of London to what we're discussing, but this is a question of priorities. This is a question of, are you going to invest in cleaner air, in making our streets safe for people who walk and cycle? Or are you going to invest in these ridiculous projects that will increase congestion in our city? I know for the Green Party and Sean Berry, we'll certainly be looking at cleaner air.
Thank you. And now to Gareth Bacon, please.
Thank you, Amir. It was good to hear that James and Sadiq Khan are such fans of the ultra low emission zone, because of course that was Boris Johnson's idea. All the work to do that was done in his second mayoralty. So I would wholeheartedly endorse what James has said about how good that is. In terms of the main question about the possible connection between Rotherhithe and Canary Wharf, of course, one of the problems with the running of Transport for London over the last 5 years is that many of the tube upgrades that were planned and were in the budget have had to be scaled back or cancelled, one of which was the Jubilee line upgrade, which would have greatly increased the capacity going between those 2 points. Now, the mayor did look at putting in a cycling and road bridge at that point, but there are all sorts of problems with this. Firstly, the river is very wide there, so it's going to have to be extremely high, and it would have to be a lifting bridge as well. And because of the way the traffic works going up and down the Thames, the bridge would have to raise and lower in time with Tower Bridge. So you would end up with situations where you could have the bridge raised in Rotherhithe for up to an hour, which would make it completely unfeasible to do. It was also very expensive. The mayor spent £12 million examining the feasibility of this before TfL came clean with him and said that actually the cost of building it was going to be upwards of £168 million. And even pre-pandemic, he didn't feel that that was value for money. And he dropped it, and I think he was right to do that. The only feasible solution in that location, and it can be done very quickly, is to have a ferry in that location, which is oyster enabled, and I think that is where we should go.
Thank you very much. Now, Andrew's going to ask a question about developments.
Yeah, thanks, Amir. One of the things that Amir and I spend a lot of time doing in this area is talking to developers. And the Southwark Cathedral and Bankside are surrounded by the possibility of large new office buildings with some of the uses included going up in the area. And there seems to be no lessening of the appetite of developers to build offices in London. But we all know that we're going to be moving into a very different series of work patterns, maybe, perhaps, none of us know. We also know that for people in areas like this who aren't necessarily working in the City of London, they may be working in the West End, in retail or in hospitality. What's London going to look like in the future in terms of the use of empty offices, but also of the job opportunities for ordinary people in an area like Southwark? And how are your parties going to help create the new London? If I can start with Zach, please, on that.
Thank you very much. So if I take that in reverse order, let's talk about the new London, because I think that's the exciting bit. I think the new London has to be about community. It has to be about this kind of new spirit, or I think the spirit's always been there, but it seems to have emerged in a more transparent way during the pandemic. I'm talking about the WhatsApp groups, the mutual aid groups, communities and neighbours finally coming together and starting to know their neighbours' names. I live in Fitzrovia, which is just about Oxford Circus. I'm a property guardian. So if anyone doesn't know what that is, I live in an old abandoned hospital. There's about 20 of us in it. And suddenly I know the people around me in my neighbourhood much better than I have in the few years that I've lived here. And I realise that some people, that sounds like a nightmare and they don't want to know their neighbours. But I think for a lot of people, that connection and inclusivity is something that our city has been missing recently. And I think a new London looks where it has small business, small independent business at its heart. And actually, the Green Party is the home of small business. We believe in local, in independence, in making sure that we're upcycling things. And all of those things, I think, come naturally in hand with a green economy. For those who know donut economics, it's a great book that I'd recommend by Kate Rawlins. But essentially, this has a manifesto set out in how we can look at a different vision. But I want to come to what I think is the darker part of your question, which is about what is the land used in our capital for? And here again, another book by a fantastic female author, Kate Minton, to say, who is London for? Because I'm really concerned about the lack of, first of all, homes. And I know there's this kind of tempting idea to say, well, actually, these offices could just turn into homes. But I think we need to be careful. We're not just creating more slums. We need good quality housing. And Labour's kind of mission seems to be both in Southwark and Lambeth to demolish left, right and centre. Not only is this a huge problem from a climate emergency point, especially with the embedded carbon, which is a subject I'm obsessed with, but I think everyone should be because it's disastrous for our environment. It's also so often residents are being left out of these decisions and they're just not being listened to. Now, James said in his introduction that the mayor has started balloting residents before they demolish their homes. And I do applaud that fact, but I think we need the fuller picture there. Sean Berry asked Sadiq Khan to bring ballots in a few years ago. He kept refusing. He said, it's a binary choice that's just in one moment in time. Well, yes, it's a binary choice about do you want your home destroyed or do you not want it destroyed? I think it's a pretty important choice. Now, I recognize that a lot of the time when people have been balloted, they've said that they do want their block demolished and regenerated. But I think that's so often because Labour are allowing these spaces to be run down. They've got mouldy walls, they've got lights that don't work, there's all sorts of issues. And then when a ballot comes to say, do you want to carry on with these issues because we can't pay to refurbish, or do you want us to demolish? Then of course people are going to go for demolish. So I think at the core of your question there is about making sure we're looking at communities, about residents, and really listening to what do they want the new London to look like, and making sure we're building it together, not from the top down, but from the community, from the grassroots. And that's exactly how the Green Party operate in creating our manifesto. It's how Sean Berry will operate as our first ever Green Mayor.
Thank you. Gareth, do you want to come in now, please?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think there's actually some common ground here between what Zach has just said and the approach that Sean wants to make. I mean, I think the redevelopment that we're seeing of Elephant and Castle, I think is an example of how not to do it, because local people were completely excluded from that process. And what they ended up with at the end of the process was not what they wanted at all. And so Sean is looking to make sure that local people are at the heart of decision making. So where there is a regeneration project for a local area, local people will get a very large say in what happens and how things will end up at the end. Sean wants to appoint a chief placemaker as part of his London plan, who will oversee any renewed development that goes forward to make sure that it is in accordance with both the London plan and also what local people want and what local people need. Now, the question about what happens to office blocks, I think is a little bit early to answer that, because we are still emerging from the pandemic. We don't yet know how our economy is going to work. We don't yet know whether people are going to carry on working from home at the rate that they've had to do over the last year. So it's a bit soon to say that. However, if we do end up with surplus buildings in central London that aren't being occupied by people, then I think it is perfectly viable and perfectly legitimate to start thinking about whether they can be repurposed into something else. That said, again, it is very important. Zach is completely right on this. Building the slums of the future and just shoehorning people into completely unsuitable buildings where there may or may not be the right infrastructure around them is not the way to go. The way to go is to make sure things can be repurposed in a way that they can actually be used properly. That means the right infrastructure, that means schools, that means hospitals, that means doctors, etc., etc. And of course, it also means appropriate transport links.
Thank you. James?
Thanks, Andrew. I think actually to pick up on one point that was just said there, and that it's quite early to know exactly how things are going to feel after the outbreak, I think is true. I think, we're still in the middle of it. We're still going through the process. Lockdown is still lifting. Let's hope we don't go back into heavier restrictions later in the year, but that's still not off the table altogether. So, I think there are some things that we will have to wait a while to see how they settle down. And I think there were some things which were important in London, right across London, but particularly inner and central London, which were important before, are important now, and will be important in the future. And at the heart of that, to link back to what I said at the very beginning, is council housing, is social housing, is making sure that places like Southwark, which are areas where open market house prices are very high, have genuinely affordable new council homes built that can hold the community together. And I think whatever happens, that will be important. I think what is true, though, is that the outbreak has made us reconsider certain things about our lives, and it's accelerated certain trends. I'm a little bit cautious about saying, are we going to all go back to not working from home? Because that overlooks the fact that lots of people have not worked from home. There are lots of people who've had to go into work throughout the outbreak, people who work in, the NHS and care homes, of course, but also people who work in shops, on the transport network, so many people on the front line. There's been no home working for a lot of people. So let's remember that when we're talking about this debate. But some people have been able to work from home. And I think what that probably underlines for a lot of people is the importance of having decent quality housing, making sure that the housing is not just affordable, but is also decent and secure and has good space standards, good access to outside space, and so on. I know there is this debate which has been touched on a little bit around offices. If some people are working from home more in the long run, we can have these offices empty in London. And there are ways through the planning system that you can plan to change buildings from offices into housing. I think it has to be done in a careful way, though, and I worry sometimes the way that certainly the government's legislation and regulations point, and to be honest, some of the other candidates have been talking about it, implies that they just want to change offices very rapidly into housing, de-restrict it, deregulate it. And I'm not sure that's right, because actually you end up destroying high streets, you end up with poor quality accommodation, you don't get affordable housing and so on. And as we've seen before with some of the government's deregulation, you just create the slums of the future by changing office buildings, sometimes even evicting office tenants from office buildings, but changing them to poor quality, unaffordable homes. So I think we need to be careful about how we plan that. The one final thing I'll just say as well is that whether people have been working from home or still going into work physically, I think a lot of us have ended up spending more time in our local area. People have been more focused on high streets. We know that high streets, a lot of high streets in London are doing well, but a lot of them are struggling, and we need to make sure that high streets are supported now and in the future, so that they do remain as the heart of our community, having community uses there alongside businesses and places where people can go out. So I think the kind of conclusion about how London looks afterwards, it's complicated because it's not just a simple one-off shift, and some things will have changed this year and might settle in a slightly different place. I think we need to remember, as I say, all the people who have given so much during this year, people who have not been able to work from home and have carried on going to work. And I also think we need to remember there are some things which, although accelerated or drawn more attention to by this crisis, have been important for a long time. So with people spending more time at home, that feeling about the need for decent, good quality housing is even more acute. But that's been an issue for Londoners for a long time. That's been at the heart of what we need to do and the heart of what we need to do in the future.
Thank you. And Florence, thank you.
Right. So yes, in London, we have that situation that there's such a deep housing crisis, and we keep on building office buildings. And of course, I don't quite get it. After the pandemic, it is very likely that many office buildings are going to be vacant. It's already been announced, maybe big corporations have said that people will go back to work on a 3-day per week basis and 2 or 3 days work from home, actually. So we will have that issue of empty office buildings. What are we going to do with them? Of course, Louisa Porritt has suggested that we may, in some cases, turn those offices into homes when it's possible. But of course, we need to look if it's feasible or not. It depends on the building, etc. But it would be an option, and it's been explored in other cities as well. Now, in London, why do we have so many office buildings and not enough homes? Well, it's because we have a very powerful property lobby of landowners, developers, and investors. And these extremely powerful property lobby is quite happy about the housing crisis because it keeps prices up and it's easy revenue for them. And this is a sort of a vicious circle that we need to break, and it needs a lot of political courage to stand up to that lobby. And I think it is time that we have politicians with the will and the courage to stand up to those lobbies and to find a way out of the housing crisis. This is why we need new faces, we need a new political class, and we need a new way. So the 2 horses have had their chance. The 2 horses were mayors, and they failed. Now, okay, it's not just 2 horses, which is good. We have other horses, and it's time to ride those new horses.
Thank you. I'm going to hand back to my brother Amir.
At 20 minutes past 20, I will just go off screen to break my fast. Andrew will chair at that moment. Before we go to the closing statements, which we'll come to shortly, I wanted to ask two questions, just summarising a lot of the questions that have come forward, about two important issues: housing and climate, and the green emergency. And really what I am trying to do in summarising these questions is ask for, on these two issues, what is it that your parties and your mayoral candidates will do outside of what you've already spoken about that will be specifically radical and progressive? What is it that you are going to do that hasn't been heard of before in this new term, in this new era outside of the pandemic, once the pandemic's over? What is it that you will be doing to address the housing crisis in London? We know that more houses need to be built. They need to be at, at the level of a third of what they are generally the market rent, to be affordable for those people who are on the waiting list and who can't afford a home. And also in terms of the climate emergency, there's been some work done both nationally and London-wide, but obviously we need to do much more to meet our targets that we set around 2030. So what is it that radically your candidates will be doing outside of what you've already spoken about and perhaps has been said on your platforms? Thank you.
Right, so shall we start then with James, please?
Thank you. Yes. So a short answer on on tackling climate change and fixing the housing crisis. Two small things there. I mean, there's so much I could talk about both. I'll just mention a few things, and actually to put it in the context of the recovery from COVID, because Sadiq is set up the London Recovery Board to bring people together about how we build back after COVID, and making sure that we tackle climate change. A new Green Deal for London is at the heart of what he wants to do. And the role of mayor uses some things which are directly within the mayor's control, and other things where he needs to collaborate with, bring along other players who have the money or the ability to do that. Where he has more control directly are over things, for instance, like transport, where he wants to make sure that the emissions come down there, and make sure transport is green, and housing, which is where he's put all sorts of green measures into his planning policy around new homes. Not just about zero carbon, but also things like the urban greening factor, which is to say that when you have new developments, they should make the city greener and more livable in. So there are some things that he has power over directly. Other things are more about bringing together other players across London, so whether that's businesses, investors, everyone else who's playing a role in London, bringing them together and making sure that tackling the climate emergency is at the heart of what they do too. Now, I wish we only had one emergency, but we've got more than one, because we've also got a housing emergency. And the housing emergency has been one building we know for many years, and it's one that Sadiq has put at the heart of his time as mayor. Tackling the housing crisis, building more council homes is vital. And I think, for him, what's really important is that when we talk about building more homes, what sort of homes we build really, really matters. And Andrew, you spoke about looking around Southwark and looking around all the new developments going up in the nearby area. If people see new homes being built and they just think, neither I nor my friends nor my family are ever going to have any chance of living in one of those homes, people start to lose trust in the process of building new homes to fix the housing crisis. And that's why having affordable housing, and when I say affordable, I know that if we had an audience here, I bet you people would roll their eyes, because the term affordable has been totally abused and misused and taken out of all shape, which is why Sadiq is really clear about this. And he puts at the heart of affordable is council housing, social housing, homes to social rent, because people know what that means. People trust homes at social rent levels. People know that those are homes that people can genuinely afford. And building those affordable homes in every part of London to make sure that every neighbourhood and every borough is mixed and diverse and can make sure it's home to people of all different backgrounds is absolutely at the heart of Sadiq's vision for London. Building those homes is essential. He's also been set out his plans to fight for the powers to introduce rent controls because he knows that building council housing will take some time. And so when I was working for him at City Hall, he developed a plan for the sort of powers he would need to introduce rent controls. And that's formed a key part of what he's saying too. And finally, we've talked about council housing, talked about the private rented sector. We know as well, somewhere like Southwark in particular, there'll be a lot of leaseholders who have bought flats and are in higher blocks in buildings, blocks of flats. We know of all the problems that people have been facing after the tragedy at Grenfell Tower and all of the concerns over fire safety. We know that it's been going on for years. There was just a vote in Parliament this evening offering the government the chance to say that leaseholders would not have to pay, but they voted that down. The government is not fixing this. Sadiq has been absolutely relentless in pushing the government and doing everything he can to try and get money off government to help fix those buildings, not, as the Green candidate once suggested, spending the affordable homes budget on that, but actually getting money from the government to make sure that those buildings are safe. So making sure we have safe buildings, making sure that Sadiq or the mayor is given powers to help private renters, and crucially, putting council housing, putting social housing at the heart of what he does is very much at the heart of Sadiq's vision.
Thank you. Gareth, please.
Thank you very much. Right, okay, I'll start with housing. So, well, of course, London does have a housing problem. It's absolutely undeniable. Sean understands this. Sean himself was also brought up in a council home, and he also experienced being homeless. He's managed to escape the trap of homelessness, and he now owns, or is part owner of a shared property home in outer London. And Sean wants other people to have the same opportunity that he had. So one of the things that he's going to do is put housing right at the heart of his mayoralty. He's going to set up a new mayoral body called Homes for London, Housing for London, which he would directly control. It will be its own City Hall property developer and they're responsible for accumulating the land and then delivering the property. He'll be working as far as he can in concert with housing developers. He's got a policy of 100,000 homes for £100,000, and this is the shared ownership model that he wants to pilot for a deposit as little as £5,000. And bearing in mind that the average deposit in London is £109,000, this is a great deal for Londoners, because what he wants to do is create more homeowners, not more landlords. In terms of James mentioned rent controls, and I think we need to deal with this one head on, because rent controls sound like a really good idea. If you're living in a flat that you rent and the rents are constantly rising, someone taking hold of that and stopping your landlord from whacking up your rent sounds like a really, really good idea. The trouble is, though, and this has been proven all over the world, if you implement rent controls, you simply reduce the supply of rented accommodation. This will not be a win for renters. The most recent example is in Berlin. When it was introduced, when rent controls were introduced in Berlin, the mayor said this was a great idea and we should look at importing it into London. Within 2 years, the number of rented properties have fallen by 50%. The mayor doesn't have the power to introduce rent controls. He knows that. He's being slightly dishonest with people by offering it because the government won't give it to him. And the reason they won't give it to him is because it will simply reduce the supply of rented accommodation. In terms of climate and the environment generally, one of Sean's earliest actions is going to be to introduce a COP summit, a London COP summit, which would spearhead London's approach to climate change, very much working hand in glove with the COP26 summit, which the government is going to be hosting in November. He's going to also ensure that the entire GLA estate is carbon neutral. And he'll be introducing interest-free grants for taxis, so that all taxis can be zero emission capable by the end of his first term as mayor. And he will also make sure that all of the buses are electric by the end of his first term as mayor. And this will be the equivalent of taking over 1 million cars off the road, and will improve air quality standards as a direct result. Finally, Sean is interested in creating pop-up parks all over London, which will help to decarbonise our environment and make things a lot better for everybody.
Thank you. Florence?
Yes, so your question was about radical ideas, and we've heard a lot of promises so far about radical ideas. Do London really need radical ideas? Maybe I think that we need to get things done, and we need to do problem solving to make Londoners' lives better. And I think that there are solutions to make London lives better. There are solutions for the housing crisis, and I mentioned that before. You have many reports and books by academics that you may have come across already, giving exactly the recommendations to end the housing crisis. And so I think it could be done if we had politicians with the will and the leadership to do so. So yes, housing crisis needs to be dealt with. It's been going on for nearly 60 years, and this is outrageous. Now the population of London is nearly 10 million. We had so many developments in East London. So we need to have people with competence, people who can deliver. And this is not what we're having right now with the current administration. So we need maybe other parties now to look into how to make London a better place to live. We also need to listen more to residents, because we do believe in a bottom-up approach rather than top-down. So we need to understand what's happening on the ground and how we can solve things locally so that people's lives really is improved. So housing crisis, of course, we need more social housing, more affordable housing, but we need more homes anyway. So we need first to reform, for example, how the land registry works. We also need to reform maybe the planning systems. So this is all the work that needs to be done to solve the housing crisis. Now, we need to boost public transports, as I said, if we want clean air in London, and this is one of the key messages of Louisa Porritt, clean air for London, we need to boost public transports. So again, we come back to the TfL debate. How do we fund TfL? And we need to fund TfL with a grant from central government. We need to make, for example, station step-free access, because we have many Londoners with limited mobility. We have many Londoners with small children, and they need to have access to stations as well. So we need those small things to make people's lives much easier and to make London greener. Now, also, we could talk about the police and the fire brigade, because it's very good to see all these new buildings in London. There's a lot of high-rise buildings, and high-rise buildings are not energy efficient, as we know. And also they have their own risks, as we remember. And we have a London Fire Brigade, which is completely underfunded. And that's not okay. When you want a vibrant city to grow, you need to have the public infrastructure in place, and the public infrastructure is public, is funded by public money, and it is for the public. It needs to be affordable. And also we need to make sure that people are secure. We need to have a fire brigade that can operate in high-rise buildings. So we have so many high-rise buildings in London, about 400 high-rise buildings in London. How many aerial appliances do we have in the fire brigade? 11. Okay, so as a way of a comparison, I had a look at the data in Paris, and in Paris, they have 63 aerial appliances. So you have 11 in London for 400 high-rise buildings, 63 in Paris, where you have less than 50 high-rise buildings. How is this possible? We want Londoners to be safe. We want Londoners to be safe. So I think that rather than radical ideas, we need to sort out all of these small things that can be sorted out. And this is what the Lib Dems are going to deliver.
Thank you. I've just got my eye on the clock. Zach, can you deal with those two big issues then in a brief time, please?
I can do. Florence is partly right. We don't need radical ideas. We just need good ideas. And if they happen to be radical too, that's great, but they don't need to be radical for radical's sake. Now, the reason I can be brief is because housing and the climate emergency aren't necessarily two different questions, because there's no environmental justice without social, racial, and economic justice too. So these two things are absolutely interlinked. Now, to look at the details very briefly, let's start with private renting. A third of people living in homes in Southwark are private renters. So this is a hugely important subject. And Sean Berry herself is a private renter, as I have been in the past. And I've moved 12 times in 10 years. A lot of the time, it wasn't my choice. Now, That is anxiety inducing for people. It's emotional when they have to move. And the first thing we have to do is end no fault evictions. And that's something we're going to lobby the government for. We also, I'm going to take on Gareth's challenge directly about rent controls. I think, without making any accusations personally at Gareth, because I don't know his personal situation, but a third of our MPs are landlords. So these are the people making the law. And there is clearly a vested interest in the people who are making the law. In fact, it was Gareth's colleagues who voted against making homes fit for human habitation. That's kind of the situation that we're dealing with there. So we absolutely need to take with a pinch of salt when people are suspicious about rent controls, because they have been proven to work. You just have to get it right. Sean Berry's plan specifically is to have a rent commission, so to freeze rents for 2 to 3 years, and then look at how we can make it work so that we don't have this supply and demand issue. If you want more details on it, more details than I can give in a 2-minute answer at the end of the hustings, you can check it out at seanberry.london. That's seanberry.london. When we look at social housing, this is an even simpler approach. We need to retrofit. This is a win-win for energy. 350,000 people in London are living in fuel poverty. A home is not affordable if you can't afford to heat it. We absolutely need to look at making sure we're insulating people's home and making better quality housing. Finally, on housing, Sean would appoint a social housing commissioner to the London Assembly. And this person would be a social tenant themselves, because the people who know most about their houses are the people who live there. We can never have another Grenfell where people are just ignored. And we don't just need to reference Grenfell. We've got it right here with the Ledbury estate. If anyone hasn't seen the documentary Cracks in Our System, absolutely needs to be checked out. This is where a Labour council ignored people's concerns for years and years and years while they waved the red flag. And then things didn't happen until things became literally critical. We need to make sure that we're listening to residents. Climate emergency, very, very quickly. We've had the housing issue already, but we also are the only party that are setting targets. We want zero carbon transport. We want zero waste. And on a side note, we want zero road deaths. If that sounds unrealistic, what target would you accept? And while Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan have been out promoting expansion of airports, myself and Sean Berry were at City Airport yesterday because we would close it down. There is no need for an airport like that. And this isn't some radical, crazy idea, because actually that land could be used as a mayoral corporation zone. We could develop things on there. We could have green space. We could have these homes we've been talking about. And finally, Rosamond Kisu-Deborah. She was the amazing campaigner whose daughter tragically died, and the coroner recently declared it as air pollution. She's been pushing hard for Ella's Law, which is to control our air pollution. She's actually a Green Party candidate in Greenwich in these elections, but Sean and I are taking her leadership, and we are calling for a Clean Air Act. We're the only party that are setting a target for our clean air. Finally, how many times have you just heard the word green from the other candidates? We can cut out the middleman. If you want green, vote green next Thursday.
Thank you. Amir has now broken his fast and so has the strength to bring this to a conclusion, haven't you?
Yes, thank you very much. So what we'll do now is just go through closing statements, and then we'll end the hustings. So if I can begin with Gareth, please.
Well, thank you very much, Amir. And I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me here today to stand in for Sean Bailey. The last 5 years have been characterised by lots of finger pointing, lots of grandstanding, lots of blame shifting, and lots of virtue signalling, but not a great deal of delivery. So Londoners will have a very clear choice come May the 6th. They can either vote for more of the same, or they can vote for what Sean Bailey is offering. So what is Sean Bailey offering? Well, he's offering to make our streets safer by hiring 8,000 new police officers and reopening 38 police stations that were closed by the present mayor. He's going to help young people getting out of crime by introducing 32 new youth centres and 4,000 youth workers. He's going to get young Londoners on the housing ladder with his policy of 100,000 homes for £100,000. He's going to clean up London's air with targeted zero-emission bus fleet and interest-free loans for the black cab drivers. He's going to fix Transport for London's finances and protect the concessionary travel. There will be a bigger and better transport network with a London Infrastructure Bank that will fund things like the Hammersmith Bridge, tube upgrades, and Crossrail 2. Most importantly, he will work constructively with the government rather than simply opposing them for opposition's sake. He's going to work in the interests of Londoners and will stand up for London, and he'll get things done.
Thank you very much. And now can we have Florence, please?
Thank you, Amir. London, London deserves better than the last 2 mayors that we had. Sadiq Khan and Boris Johnson before him. They have failed London with service reductions in the police, in fire stations, closures, housing crisis, homelessness. It's been disastrous. London deserves better, and Louisa Porritt and her team, including myself, want to give Londoners the voice and the leadership they deserve. So my last radical idea, if I may, is that we need to tackle the clean air crisis in London. And one of the emergency is the air pollution in the tube. I think that nobody's mentioned it, but air pollution in the tube is extremely harmful. So we need a deep clean of the tube, amongst other things. And this is what the Lib Dems are going to deliver. The Lib Dem have the will and the competence to get things done and to deliver what they promise. And this is why I hope that on the 6th of May, you're going to give your 3 votes for the Lib Dems. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you very much. Now can we have James, please?
There you go. Thanks, Amir. When Sadiq was first elected back in 2016, I don't think any of us could have imagined the challenges that the next 5 years would bring. So many challenges over those 5 years, and now we're living through one of them with the COVID outbreak. And you know, at the moment, the vaccine is giving us all a bit of hope at the end of the tunnel, that there is, we will emerge from this, we will have the chance to build a better future. And what Sadiq has said is that in a way, like 1945, in the aftermath of a historic crisis, there's a question about how we respond and how we change London, how we build back in a fairer, better and brighter way in the future for people who live in London, and also to for the sake of everyone who's worked on the front line and suffered and lost their lives throughout the COVID outbreak. And if you look at what Sadiq has set out, you know, he set out a way that you can build a city which is greener, fairer and safer, and crucially one where our values are protected and cherished and celebrated. And I believe that Sadiq Khan is the candidate who has the record and the vision and the values to make that a reality.
Zach, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I really do want to pay compliment to everyone who's organised it. I feel like a theme of a lot of what I've said tonight in our Green campaign, and to be fair, other parties' campaigns too, has been about community. It's been about local activists and organisers. And I think this event epitomises that. With my final minute, I just want to work as a bit of an information campaign, because this is probably the most confusing election in history in terms of mixed systems. You have 4 votes on Thursday, 6th of May, or by post. You have a pink ballot paper. On that pink ballot paper, there are 2 votes. You have a first preference from there and a second preference from there. Putting your first preference is the vote that you want to win, voting with your heart. Your second preference is your safety vote or your insurance vote. That's the vote if you want to stop any other candidate. So I quite like the slogan, Sean before Khan. I don't mind who you vote for your second preference, but I'd really encourage you to vote Sean Berry for your first preference. The yellow paper is your local constituency paper, which is Lambeth and Southwark. You have Claire Shepherd. She's our Green Party candidate. She is a mother in Southwark. She's fantastic. You can find out more about her on her regular Twitter and social media accounts. I encourage you to. The orange paper. This is the one I want to push on you guys tonight, because that is our party list. And that's traditionally where Greens can and do win. By voting Green on your orange ballot paper, if you've agreed with what I've said tonight, you'll effectively be sending me to City Hall in 10 days' time. Now, Gareth partly accused us of being virtue signalers, and I'm going to take that. Do I signal my virtue? Damn right I do. Every single day, but not just virtue signal, we will take the action, because I don't think there's anything wrong with having virtue. So if you want to end street homelessness, vote Green. If you want to stop suspicionless stop and search, vote Green. If you want more parks, zero waste. If you want a better vision of our society, if you want the most trans inclusive city in the world, if you want to protect young Black people from being victimized by the police, if you want them being held accountable, if you want to prevent institutional racism, if you want to stand up for LGBTIQA rights, I could keep going. All of these things can happen if we just hope and vote Sean for that first choice. Londoners, we can do this. Thank you very much for listening tonight. Keep tweeting, keep sharing, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming. Gareth, James, Florence, and Zach. Thank you very much for attending, and to everyone else who's watching. And I want to pay a special tribute to Southwark Cathedral, who have helped us host this, and to Alex, who's there in the background, who's organised this and spoken to you as candidates to make this happen. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming. Can I say something, Amir, please? Yeah, sure. Because we couldn't deal with every issue, and one of the things we haven't really talked about enough is our young people, and that their needs are high on our agenda. But I don't want this to pass without actually paying tribute to Folajimi Adewole, who died trying to rescue somebody from the river in our patch. He jumped into the Thames right by Southwark Cathedral, which is at the heart of living Bankside. And I think often our young people get such a bad press and such a bad reputation, and then somebody acts heroically and selflessly in that way, and that must affect every one of us who are thinking about the future of our city and about the contribution that our young people are actually going to make to building the better London in the future, and to being the people just the same as you on this screen who have a deep concern from different perspectives, but all wanting basically at the end of the day the same thing, that every human being flourishes in our city and that Black Lives Matter. So thank you, Amir, as well, for letting me butt in at that point. No, absolutely. I agree with what you're saying. I was just about to say, what Zach was saying about hope. I think all politicians and all candidates who are standing definitely want to see a better London and a better country. And I think the main thing to take away is when we do emerge out of this pandemic, we have far more in common that unites us than that which divides us, and that's what we need to take forward. So thank you very much for